Welcome back everyone. For today's video we are going to be taking a look at the 45th Chess Olympiad, which starts today in Budapest, Hungary. Now there are two sections with many countries competing. In the men's section I believe there are 197 nations, and in the women's section there are 183. Now many top players are playing, many streamers are competing. With so many games, there are only that many we can actually look at. So the first game we're going to start with is a game featuring the famous streamer Anna Cramling, who is playing in this event representing her home country of Sweden, and in the first round she's playing against an opponent rated 1681. So Anna has the black pieces, and let's jump right into the action. Game starts with the move e4. Anna plays c5, knight f3, and now we get the move e6. Here the game continues with the move knight c3. We get knight to c6, d4 takes, and now we have the move knight to f6. Now this is what is known as the Sicilian four knights here. Both sides have brought out these knights on c6 and f6, and white has brought out the knights to f3 to d4 and c3. Now there are other openings as well which are similar. For example, you also have the Scotch four knights, which occurs in this position after knight c3, where once again all the knights are brought out immediately before you develop any of the other pieces. All right, so back to the game. We get the Sicilian four knights, and here Anna's opponent rated 1681 plays a mistake with the move knight to f3. There are multiple variations in the Sicilian where black plays e6 to develop this bishop on the diagonal. One line that I actually played when I was very young was the system with d4 takes, knight f6, knight c3, and bishop to b4. And many of these cases, if white ever drops knight back to f3 or b3, for example, it's considered to be a little bit dubious. All right, so we get knight to f3 here. The main moves, by the way, for white are to play knight c6, a3, or a move like bishop to e2. In this game, we get the move knight to f3. Now here Anna plays bishop b4, pinning the knight on c3. If white were to play a move like bishop to e2, after knight takes e4, you cannot capture the horse, as you would lose your king on e1. So we get the move bishop to d3, guarding the pawn on e4 from being captured, and now the game continues with the move queen c7. Now one thing that I learned when I was much younger about these systems where you play e6 and bishop b4 is that if you can ever play for d5 right away, generally black is supposed to equalize immediately, but here Anna instead plays move queen c7. We get h3 being played, and now Anna plays h6 here, both sides being a little bit cagey. Anna's opponent plays h3 because she probably was worried about castles and something like knight to g4 with knight d4 and knight e5. Keep in mind her opponent is significantly lower rated here, and at a lower level there's some of these boogeyman ideas that you see where you get really afraid. So we get h3. Anna plays h6 for much a similar reason. She wants to stop the bishop from coming to g5. If black's bishop were on e7 here, for example, bishop g5 would not be a big threat because then you could kick the bishop. But due to black having put this bishop on b4 here, you're a little bit worried that after castles and bishop g5 you might have to waste a tempo retreating the bishop, and you simply don't want to do it. So Anna plays h6. Now we get the move bishop d2. Here we have the move a6 being played to stop white from jumping to b5 with the horse, and now the move queen to e2. Anna plays the move d6, and now we get the move castles, and Anna decides the castle. Now it's very important to note here that d6 is an important move, because if Anna were to castle immediately here, white could potentially play something like g4 followed by rook to g1 and g5, attacking very quickly on the king side and creating a lot of chaos. So Anna instead plays move d6 here, and now we get this move castles, and here castles is played by Anna, and now we have the move rook fe1. Here Anna plays the move rook to d8, and I think her idea was to try and play for this d5 move. Game continues with e5, and this is simply a mistake. What white should have played here was a move like rook a d1 or a move like a3. Now let's be clear, the players are at a lower level. It's very difficult, and I've said this many times, that when you play openings like the Gucci piano, for example, or situations where you don't have open files or open diagonals, coming up with a plan can be very difficult. And because the center is closed here, e5 is a move that I can see Anna's opponent wanting to go for because it opens up the board. But that being said, I think this is why when you play certain openings, you need to play things that are in your style with open files or open diagonals, because it's just very difficult sometimes. So we get e5. Anna trades the pawns on e5, and now she plays the move knight to d4, a nice move forking the queen and the pawn. We get the move queen to e3, and now Anna plays the move bishop c5, trying to line up a classic family fork here with knight takes c2, hitting the rooks and the queen at the same time, with the bishop attacking the queen as well. So her opponent plays move queen g3. Now we get this nice move knight to f5, attacking the queen, and her opponent plays queen f3. Now if white were to play bishop takes knight here, this would be a severe error, because after rook takes bishop, you've created the kebab on the second rank. And if white doesn't move the bishop, say you go rook f1, I take the bishop and win the game. And if you move the bishop away, I play bishop takes pawn, checking the king and attacking the queen. And after takes, and something like b5 followed by bishop b7, black simply has a queen in return for a rook and a horse, and the queen is much more valuable. So we get the move queen to f3. Anna plays bishop to d6 here. Now, one thing you will notice about the game is that Anna is down a lot of time on the clock here. She's down 45 minutes. The position is okay, but it still feels a little bit dicey. We get knight to g4, and now Anna plays the move bishop to e7, guarding the knight on f6. Game continues with the move knight to e4, and this is not the best move. At this point, if Anna's opponent had played the move bishop to f4 here, she would have been in some serious trouble, because if you play a move like queen to a5, for example, white can go rook a d1 here, and with the knight and the bishops here combined with the lack of development of this bishop and this rook, black is severely behind in development, and there are serious problems looming. Instead, we get knight to e4. Anna trades the knights. We get queen takes knight, and here she's able to play the move bishop to d7, more or less completing her development, trying to bring the rook to c8 and maybe the bishop to c6 as well. Here we get the move knight takes h6, and this is simply not the best move. Now, I understand why Anna's opponent played this move. It feels like you kind of want to sack, go for glory, but here, if white were to play the move knight to e5, stopping black from putting this bishop on c6, there's also a big threat that if you play rook c8, I can go g4 here, and with a double A battery of the bishop and the queen, if you move the horse, it's uh-oh spaghetti-o after queen h7, king f8, and queen to h8, checkmate. So Anna's opponent goes for glory with knight takes pawn. Here we get the move pawn takes knight. If you were to take with the knight here, you would lose the game, because now white can go check, king f8, and take the knight, not queen h8 first, although this might still be good because you have bishop to h7. But at any rate, you would simply take the horse. If black takes, you have the queen h8 checkmate once again, and if black goes bishop to f6, you can simply retreat with the bishop to e3 or d2, and white is much better. So we get g takes h6. Here we have the move g4 being played, and this is simply a bad decision. Now, if white were to go queen g4, the position is actually very balanced here. It looks very scary for black, but after knight to g7, bishop takes h6, bishop f6 here, white can make an awkward looking draw with queen to e4, threatening the check. And after knight f5, queen g4, black has nothing better than to repeat with the knight back to g7. Instead, Anna's opponent plays g4. Of course, we have to realize her opponent is 1600. This is not at a level where you're going to be able to play a complete game from start to finish. And now after Anna goes bishop c6, attacking the queen, this breaks up the double A battery, and without the threats of the mate on h7, after queen to e5, for example, the queens come off, and knight h4, and with white simply having sacrificed the horse, the knight's going to f3 to fork the rook, the bishop, and the king, and white can already resign. We get the move rook to h5. Anna plays knight f3, king to f1, knight takes d2, king to g1, and now we have the move bishop g5. Here her opponent plays h4. We get knight to f3, king to f1, and now knight takes h4. We have rook e1, bishop g2, and at this point, Anna's opponent, rated 1681, resigns the game. Now, normally you would think at this level they would play on, but I think it's actually quite respectful to resign here, because if you go king g1, there's knight to f3, forking the king and the rook. After takes, king g1, takes, and even rook c8 or rook takes d3, really doesn't matter what black does. You have an extra rook and a bishop on the board, and white has 0 chances to survive. So if white were to play the other option, which is king to e2, you have a neat little idea with check, king f1, and bishop takes g4, and the bishop and the bishop's knight and the pawn all combine to trap this rook here. If you take, I take. If you take, I take. If you take, I take. And so you're going to lose this rook on h5, so black simply has too much material. So Anna gets a nice win after this move bishop g2. It's a good start for her with the win. I honestly would be a little bit concerned though, because she was playing someone who's about 400 points lower rated, and she actually was in a lot of trouble at the start of the game. Nonetheless, all's well that ends well for Anna. I would point out that in the first round of the Olympiad, there are going to be a lot of lopsided matchups, and one of the most important things is to try and avoid the landmines and avoid some kind of mishap. All right, so the next game we're going to be looking at occurs in the match between Azerbaijan and Jordan. Now, many teams have tinkered with their lineups. You might have a player like Arjun Erigaisi, who's a top-rated Indian player, but he's not playing on board one. And in the case of Azerbaijan, we have something very similar with Shakhriyar Mamedyarov, who is the highest-ranked Azeri player. He's been as high as, I think, number 2 or 3 in the world, and he is playing on board 4. So the Azeris are putting Shakhriyar on the bottom board, hoping that he can win every game a la Bobby Fischer and simply bring home the gold medal for the Azeris. So in round 1, Shakhriyar on board 4, playing a 1994 rated player. He is playing someone nearly 800 points lower rated than him. He's got to be a big favorite. He's got to be like 99.999% chance to win. I'm no professor of statistics, but I do believe the odds imply that he's going to win pretty often. So will he actually win? Well, let's find out. So Shakhriyar is playing against a talented junior. I might point this out, that players who are fairly young, they can be underrated at times. And let's see how the game goes. So we get d4. Shak plays knight f6. We get c4, e6, knight c3, and now we have the move bishop b4. Now here, Anas Kawira plays move a3. If I'm mispronouncing it, I apologize to all the Jordanians out there. But he plays this move a3. Now you might have noticed this is the exact system that was played quite recently in the Speed Chess Championship between Alireza Firouzja and Magnus Carlsen, and it's a very aggressive structure. It was also played in a recent match between Levi Rozman and Fabiano Caruana, which we recapped the other day as well. So we get knight c6. Here we have the move f3, and now we get the move d5 from Shakhriyar. What Anas Kawira is trying to do here is he wants to build a big white center with these pawns on c3, c4, d4, e4, and f3. I believe in the Magnus game that he had against Alireza, I think he played bishop a6, or maybe he played h6. I don't remember the exact order, but they did actually have something very, very similar to this in that game. Shak instead plays d5, trying to stop white from building the big white center, and now we get pawn takes, pawn takes, and we have the move e3. Game continues with bishop f5. We get the move knight to e2, and now Shak plays this aggressive move h5. Now the reason that Shakhriyar plays h5 is that if he were to castle here, white can actually try to extend even further on the king side by pushing p, and if you go bishop g6 after h4, let's just say h5, g5, knight e8, and knight f4, suddenly there's a lot of pressure on the king side. White's developing very quickly, and black is actually significantly worse already. So Shak plays h5. Now I would point out that for Shakhriyar as well, he's playing someone who's so much lower rated than him that he probably figures he can do almost anything. He can pretty much walk on water and win no matter what. So we get the move knight g3. We have bishop g6 being played, and now we get the move bishop to d3. Shakhriyar plays h4, trying to disrupt the white harmony. If white could, for example, get e4 hit in here with the pawn, the bishop, and the knight supporting it, white could be much better. So we get h4. Knight e2 is played here, and now Shakhriyar trades the bishops, and he decides to castle's king. White castles as well, and now we get the move rook e8, trying to stop white from playing e4. Anas plays the move rook to a2, and this is the first sign in the game where you can sense that Shakhriyar's opponent is not simply a low-rated 1900 or 2000 rated player. And the reason I bring this up is there are many systems that are very similar to this, where white puts the rook on a2. If I guess I can't put the pawn back on h7 easily, but there are many systems where if we just ignore this pawn on h4 for a second, white will play rook a2, rook to e2, followed by the move e4. So this idea of putting the rook on a2 and swinging it over is a high level idea and concept, and Anas is in it to win it. So we get rook a2. Here Shakhriyar plays knight to a5, trying to stop white from pushing c4, but also potentially jumping to the c4 square and creating the classic bastion. Now we get the move knight to f4. Shakhriyar plays c5, and we have the move rook to e2. White is still trying to prepare to play e4 here. If you play a move like a6 and white gets e4, takes, 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 takes. White has two central juicers, the big white center, and white is much better. Shakhriyar plays knight to b3, and now we get the move bishop b2, another nice move here, because if black were to play a6 in this position, again you can go e4, because after takes, 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 the bishop and the queen guard the pawn, and the rook and the queen guard the other central pawn, and now the knight on b3 is under attack. So if white can ever get these two central pawns together like this in the formation, white should be much better. So Shakhriyar goes queen b6 here, queen d6 I should say here, and now we get the move rook fe1. The computer here already is giving white a very big advantage if white were to play the move g3. The reason for this is that g3 supports the horse. So if black goes a6 and you get e4 here, now the knight is no longer hanging, and we end up in the same structure with the big white center, and white will win the game, as I've already said 20 times. Instead, rook fe1 is played. Shakhriyar plays the move pawn takes pawn. We get takes, and now we have the move knight to a5. Here Anas plays the move bishop c3. We get knight to c4, and now we have this nice move bishop b4 being played. Important move here because the bishop guards the pawn, but it also targets the queen at the same time. Shakhriyar here plays queen c6, and now white is able to get in this very critical e4 move. And at this point, I was watching the game live during my live stream, and it already is starting to feel very dangerous, where we might be in for one of the all-time upsets that we've ever seen in the great game of chess. Shakhriyar decides to trade the pawns, and here he plays this move rook a d8. Now, one of the difficult things is when you're playing someone so much lower rated, more often than not, you assume that sooner or later they're going to make a mistake. You play natural moves, and sometimes you're not completely on guard. And this is a perfect example where Shakhriyar still thinks he's probably fine, but here his opponent, Anas Kawira, plays a great move, knight to d5, and this move is absolutely winning for white. Now, Shakhriyar Mamedyarov, one of the consistent top 5 players in the world, is suddenly in all kinds of trouble against a kid from Jordan. Now, the reason this move is so strong is that if black were to trade the horses, the pawn touches the queen, or I should say attacks the queen, and here if you take, suddenly you get mated on the back rank out of thin air. And if you were to move the queen away, I simply trade all the rooks off the board. I play queen c4, queen e3, king f1, and now there are no checkmates here, and white is going to win the game with the extra bishop and the passed d pawn. So Shakhriyar is probably hit by the lightning bolt here. He decides to play this move knight to h5. If black were to play a move like knight b6, for example, there's knight to e7, and after takes, white simply is up a rook for a horse, and white will win the game. So Shakhriyar plays knight to h5 here, probably hoping that he would get the move knight to e7 because black can sack the rook and then go for this nice move knight to f4, forking the queen and the rook in return. And after here takes, and a move like rook to e8, black is completely fine. Instead, Anas again plays the best move, which is rook to c2, going after this pinned knight on c4. Shakhriyar plays move rook c8, and now the move knight to e7 is in play, creating the classic fork of the rook, the queen, and the king. And after takes, now if you go knight to f4, there is no longer a rook on e2, so all you're doing is attacking the queen, and I can very calmly move my queen away to f1. Shakhriyar plays move knight g6 here, and now we get to move bishop b4. Now at this point, white is up a rook for a knight. Shakhriyar is completely lost in this position against someone so much lower rated than him that is kind of mind-boggling. We get the move b5 here, and now Anas plays the move rook f2. Shakhriyar plays queen d7, and we get this move bishop c5, attacking the pawn on a7 while guarding the pawn on d4. Shakhriyar goes a6, and now we get the move queen to e2. We have h3 being played, and we get this move g3. Here Shakhriyar plays queen e6, and Anas responds with queen to h5, trying to pressure the pawns on h3 and or f7. Shakhriyar goes knight to e5, and now we get this move rook f1, another very important move. You were to take the knight after rook takes bishop here with the weak pawn on e5 and all kinds of weak light squares around the white king, white could be in big trouble. So he goes rook f1. Shakhriyar plays rook c7 here, and now we get to move queen to f5. Here we have knight g4 being played, and now the trade of the queens, and we get to move rook to e2. Now at this point, as you can tell from the evaluation bar, Shakhriyar has kind of climbed his way back into the game a little bit. He's still losing here, but with his great knights on g6 and g4 combined with his pawn on h3, there are always some weaknesses near the white king. We get to move rook c8. Now we have bishop b4, rook to d8, and here Anas plays bishop c5. Shakhriyar goes back, and now we get to move rook c1. Here knight f6 is played, and now we have king to f2, rook to c7, and we get this move king to e1. Shakhriyar plays knight h8, king to d2, and now we get the move knight to f7, where black is trying to bring these knights into the game via g5, g4, and f3. If black can use these knights and get a nice setup like knight g5, knight g4, and then knight to f3, suddenly the knights are very, very active here, and white is only very slightly better. So we get king d3, Shakhriyar plays rook to d7, we get king c3, and now he plays move knight g5, targeting the pawn on e4. Anas plays the move rook to e1, we get to move rook c7, king to b4, and here the game ends in a draw after this move knight to f3. Now what probably happened here is that Shakhriyar offered a draw here with the intention that after white moves the rook, he'll go knight g5. If white goes e5, suddenly black gets a blockade with these knights, and the knights are very, very jumpy suddenly, and if white goes rook e1, you simply go back to f3 and make a repetition. Now, should Shakhriyar's opponent have made the draw here? With limited time on the clock, you have 4.5 minutes, your opponent is 29 minutes. It's a very difficult decision because you know you're probably winning, but at the same time, you're playing one of the greatest players of all time who outranks you, who you never ever think that you can beat. And with such low time on the clock, I think it's very understandable because when you take the draw here, not only do you gain a nice amount of rating points, but you also have a great story to go home and tell your kids down the road. I guess his opponent here is only 17 years old, so it's a little bit different, but you're going to have a great story, a great memory from the Chess Olympics where you will have played to an even result against one of the best players of all time. So game ends in a draw. Now, this is the game we thought would be probably one of the biggest upsets of the day, but when all is said and done, Shakhriyar gets the draw, and it's not great for him, but Azerbaijan still would go on to win the match by a score of 3.5 to half. All right, so one final game we're going to take a look at is a game from the match between the United States and Panama. Now, one of the last times, actually, I think it should be the last time that I competed in the Olympiad in 2018. In the first round, I was playing for the United States of America, and we actually played against Panama in that event as well. And this time is no different. It might be 6 years later, but we do have a matchup between the US and Panama. Now, one of the players who switched over during that time period from Armenia to the United States is Levon Aronian. He's playing on board 3 for the US team, and in round 1 he's playing against a 16-year-old Panamanian kid, Mendez Machado Andre. So Levon has the black pieces. Again, a big mismatch in terms of rating, and you would expect him to win very cleanly. So we got the move e4. Lev plays c5, we get knight f3, knight c6, and now we have the move bishop b5. One problem when you play players who are a lot lower rated is generally you have to take some risk. Levon is a player who for his entire career has pretty much exclusively played the king pawn opening with e4 and e5, but when you're playing some of the 600 points lower rated, you gotta go for it. So we get a Sicilian, we have bishop b5, and Levon plays knight f6, and here we get the move knight c3. Game continues with g6, we get the move e5, and Levon puts this knight on h5. Here we get the trade of the bishop for the knight, and black correctly captures with the d pawn to open up this diagonal for the light square b. Machado castles his king, Levon goes knight g7, and here we get the move d3. Now in this position, Levon plays this move h6. It's a little bit of a weird decision. I assume Levon played this because probably figured if he moved the knight to e6, maybe white could play something like knight to g5 here, and he also might have thought that after h6 down the road he could push g5 and g4 as well. So we got the move knight to e4. Levon plays b6, and now we have the move rook to e1 being played, and here Levon plays this move knight f5. Now this is the first step in the wrong direction. When you look at this position, if Levon were a lifetime Sicilian player, he would know that the knight actually belongs on this e6 square to stop white from playing d4 and to push for g5 and g4. Also, down the road, you might think, well, light square b is no longer active, and the reason he goes here is because he wants to play bishop e6 and bishop d5. But generally, if you put the knight on e6 here and you go bishop b7, if white ever tries to play d4 down the road, you can trade, and in the long run, just to set it up, you end up with some position like this where black will play c5, opening up the long diagonal for the light square b. Instead, we get knight f5. Here Machado plays c3, a nice move stopping knight to d4 and or preparing to build a big white center with the pawn push. Levon goes g5, and here we get this great move queen to a4 being played. Now the amazing thing about this move is this is absolutely the best move in the position. It's not a move that's very intuitive. In fact, when I was watching the game live, I saw the computer say this was the best move, and I thought there was a pretty low chance that it would be played. Nonetheless, Machado plays queen a4, attacking the pawn, and here Levon, in his haste, using only 2 minutes, makes a huge mistake by playing this move queen to c7. Now this move is simply a losing blunder by Levon, one of the top 5 ranked players of all time. He is losing after 12 moves to 2100. What on earth is going on in this Olympiad? First Shakhriyar, now we see Levon struggling. What on earth? Now my explanation for these mistakes is that when you're playing someone so much lower rated, generally you just feel like you can do anything to win the game, and you're not super focused the way you would be if you're playing against another top player. Unfortunately for Levon, his opponent is ready and plays a great move g4, attacking the horse on f5, and now Levon plays this very sad move queen to b7. Now the reason that Levon just gives up the horse on f5 is that if he moves the knight to g7, white can play the very nasty move knight to d6, checking the king. If you take the horse, we end up with a fossil. The rook checks the king, and my pawn will capture the queen. If you go here, I take with a pawn, you move your king, you lose the queen, and you lose the game. If you were to move your king to d7 here, there's knight f7 check. Let's just say rook h7, and after queen to e4, your rook is now trapped. Can't go back to h8. You're going to lose the rook. You're going to lose the game, and it's just an absolute mess and a disaster for Team USA. So Levon plays this very sad move queen to b7, simply giving up the horse on f5. He does get one pawn in return for it, and maybe some hope that down the road with white not having a pawn on g2, maybe you can mount an attack on the king side. Here Machado plays d4. We get to move bishop to g4, and this is where Machado misses the first of many opportunities to simply end Levon on the spot. Now the move that's winning here for white is this very tactical move d5, pinning this pawn on c6. Black can't capture. If black were to play the move bishop takes knight, trying to regain the material balance, white takes the pawn here. If you move the queen to c8, for example, I can go c7 check, you block, and then I sack the other horse with knight to f6, and after take 6, suddenly your king is stuck. You have no squares available, and after bishop e7, I play rook takes bishop. Still can't take with the queen here because then I capture king, and after the king moves, I take the queen. It will be checkmate very soon. So After d5, black, if you take and black goes queen c7 instead of queen c8, again you have this very nasty idea with knight d6 check. And again, takes, same tactic where you lose the queen, and if you move the king, I take the pawn, forking the king and the rook. And after king c8, the simplest way to win here is to go check, king b8, trade off the queens here. Black has to take, or else you lose the rook. And then after knight takes rook, bishop h5, trying to kill the escape squares, you simply go for this move e6 here. And after bishop g7, knight f7, white has one extra rook here. We're in an endgame. White will win this game all the time. The last point I want to make is after d5, black could try to castle the king here, but if black castles, white has many ways to win, but probably the cleanest is to go knight to d6 check. And after takes, king b8, you can simply trade off all the pawns here and play something like queen to f5. And after, let's just say rook e8 even, you can simply go bishop d2. And white has an extra horse, very limited material on the board, only these two open d and e files here, and white should win this game 100% of the time. Instead, we get to move knight fd2 being played. Not a bad move. White still has an extra horse, but it doesn't end immediately. Levon takes on d4, and here we get another great choice, which is knight to b3. Now, white could have simply taken on d4 right away, and it would have led to something similar, but knight b3 gives black the opportunity to accidentally try to take another pawn on c3, and now after knight f6 check takes and queen g4, with such limited material, only 2 and 1 minor pieces on the board, black will lose the game. So Levon castles, we get takes, and now Levon plays the move king b8. Now at this point, when you're losing to someone much lower rated, what you're thinking about is you're thinking, well, I just got to move quickly, get them low on time, and maybe they will make a mistake. So Machado plays bishop d2. We got this move bishop d7. Now I do want to point out this is probably one of the most critical moments where I do think d5 again should have been played, not because it's the best move, but because when black takes the pawn, you can simply move this knight to c5, and if you're able to get rid of the bishop and you end up in a situation where black only has rooks and one bishop on the board, the extra material should play and you should win the game. Instead, we got the move bishop d2, and now we have the move bishop d7, and here Machado plays queen a3. Levon goes bishop f5, we get the move rook a c1, and this is probably the moment where I think Machado starts to let it slip a little bit. You can see he has 26 minutes on the clock, and he spends 10 minutes before playing this move. Now, Levon goes e6 in this position, and here we got the move queen to a4. This might be the best move still, but honestly, if I were playing here, I would go knight d6 here, just to get some pieces off the board before I get too low on time. When you're way ahead of material, you generally want to trade down. Instead, we have queen to a4. Levon goes rook c8, guarding this pawn on c6 from being captured, and now we have the move rook c3. Levon plays king a8, and here we get this move knight to g3. Now already here, with Levon being up 26 minutes on the clock and his opponent not having a clear plan, I started to sense that the game was actually starting to turn. I thought at this point what was likely to happen was knight g3, bishop h3, and knight to e4 back, simply making a draw here in this position. Fortunately for Levon, and unfortunately for his opponent, he plays this very unfortunate move knight to f1, which is a huge mistake here, because what it allows is black can go b5, and here we got the move knight to a5. Now white could have played queen a5, which is what you're thinking, obvious move, why not? But here black can play bishop b4, and the queen is simply trapped. You have no squares to go to other than to capture the bishop. So now you're up 2 pieces and you're winning, except for the fact that black has c5 here, attacking the queen, but more importantly, opening up this long diagonal. If you take the pawn, there's queen to g2, checkmate on the spot. If you don't take the pawn, you can take the bishop, but now you lose your queen. And here white has 3 pieces, 2 knights and a b in return for the queen. Probably if this were a top level game, I think white would still win, but honestly, it's very hard when you've built up this big advantage, you know you've let it slip, and you're playing a top player who will make no mistakes whatsoever. So instead we get knight to a5, which is completely fine, but now the game is back to where it's balanced, and with Levon being such a great player historically, he should find a way. So we get takes, Levon trades the bishop for the knight, king takes knight, and now we get the move rook c4. Now white is still marginally better. Honestly, I think if Levon were playing someone like Magnus Carlsen, I think Magnus would still beat him with white from this position, but against a 2100 where psychologically we're up a piece, you're winning, and now you're back in a very, very slightly better endgame, it's simply too much to ask for such a player to defend. And on top of that, white also only has 4 minutes on the clock. So we get bishop e7, rook takes pawn, we get rook d8, and now we have the move bishop e3, and here Levon plays c5. Now Levon probably doesn't want to go for c5 here because it does lead to more trades, but at the end of the day, it is still a rook and pawn endgame. We get takes, rook to e4, bishop b6, we get takes, and now we have the move rook e2. Levon plays rook d1, we get king g2, and now we have this move h5. Here we get f4, g4, and the move king to g3. Now there's already a step I would say kind of in the wrong direction. I probably would prefer something like rook f2 and f5 here, but we get king g3, and now Levon plays rook g8. Here we get the move rook to e3, rook to f1, and now Machado makes a catastrophic mistake with this move rook to f2. The position here is still equal. If white were to play rook d2, trying to create the kebab on the 7th rank, if black moves the king over, you have the check, and then here you can go rook d7, and now white's a little bit better. And if black were to play something like, I don't know, rook g1, for example, you can simply go king to f2, rook h1, king g2, followed by rook d7 once again. Instead, Machado plays rook f2, and very sadly, this is the 40th move, and it is a blunder because now Levon can play h4, checking the king. If you take the pawn, you lose the rook in the game. And after king g2, now black plays the move rook to d1, and there's some serious threats with moves like g3 or h3 in the position. White is struggling, and Machado blunders the game away with this move rook e2. Probably after f5, white is still kind of okay. Probably Machado was worried about h3 and rook g1 and something with like rook h8 or something with g3, but after king f4, white is still actually completely fine here. Nonetheless, psychologically, I think it's too much to ask, and especially at this level. So we get rook e2, Levon plays h3, we get king g3, rook to g1, king to h4, and now the breakthrough with g3. And after rook takes g3, Machado, Mendez, Andre resigns the game against Levon Aronian because black is simply setting up a very, very nasty ladder. If you go rook h2, black can play rook to g6, and rook h8 is simply checkmate no matter what you do on the next turn, where the two rooks checkmate the white king. And if you were to play with like king h5, it doesn't matter. I still go rook g6 here, and rook h8 is unavoidable with the checkmate. So Levon gets a miracle escape in the first round. Now it's worth pointing out that he gets this miracle escape. Wesley So on board one would draw his game. So at moments this match was looking very, very tense, where the US might barely squeak out a win, but they end up winning by a score of 3.5 to half. Levon has a miracle victory. He moves on to fight another day. Definitely, I think from the general standpoint, it's very important for Levon to get this wake-up call. Hopefully he comes back a little bit stronger, and we'll see how he performs in this Olympiad, because in the last one he played in 2022, his performance was not particularly inspiring. At any rate, that is day one of the Chess Olympiad, which is being held in Budapest, Hungary. I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap from the first day. We'll be doing recaps every day, but at any rate, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back with some great recaps throughout this very long and exciting team event in Hungary. See you guys soon. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.